Hi everyone. Today's class will work on Dandasana, seated Dandasana, and we'll work our way there, work around it, and explore this pose. This is a seated pose. It is in the same way that Tadasana, or mountain pose, has a sort of seminal quality or an elemental quality that we see reflected through the standing poses. Dandasana is a very elemental seated pose, and so many of the other seated poses sort of emerge from it, or the qualities that we can, the challenges and qualities that we can find in the other seated poses can be found and initially explored through Dandasana. When I first started practicing yoga, Dandasana was an extremely hard pose for me. It looks really simple on paper, but in execution I found it quite challenging for many years. So if you find it challenging, I hope we can work on that and build strength, not just in a muscular sense, but strength of connection, neural patterning, and familiarity and enthusiasm for working on this pose. It is very much a pose about stability and emergence, and the ability to be strongly anchored and also buoyant all at once. So we'll work on finding those qualities in our execution of the pose. So before we begin, just sit yourself in a position that's comfortable for you. Bring your shoulders a little bit back and bring your hands down to the floor. Maybe if you're sitting on something, push down and just gently push through the hands and use that action to help yourself sit a little taller. We'll come back to this action again in Dandasana. Lift the chest. Let your eyes close. Let your hands rest on your lap. Relax your jaw. And just take a few deep breaths. Use the breath to neutralize some of the activity in the mind, to quiet the inner dialogue so you have more capacity for presence. And I'll chant the sound Om and the invocation to Sri Patanjali. And you can chant with me or just listen. Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakarottam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjalyaranatosmi Abahu Purushakaram Shankachakrasithardinam Sahasrashirasam Shvetam Pranamami Patanjalim. Om Shanti 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 Om. And let your hands come to your lap and lift your head and open the eyes. So we'll start with our hands and knees in cat-cow position. So come on over to your mat. And you might like to have folded blanket for the knees, especially if your knees are uncomfortable on your sticky mat. It's always good to have comfort there when possible. And place your hands about shoulder width apart and your knees about hip width apart. Keep the arms straight and bring the gaze straight down. So you're looking down at the ground between your thumb tips. Move the shoulders a little bit away from the ears and draw the navel in. So there's just a baseline sort of sense of being connected to oneself. And then keeping the navel in, keeping the belly lightly engaged. As you inhale, lift the tailbone up. Think of like a chow-chow or a pug. And draw the chest forward, shoulders down, chest forward, and look forward. And then as you exhale, start to tuck the tailbone like a dog with a tail between its legs. Draw the navel in, push the hands into the floor, and tuck your chin and look back towards your own navel. Inhale, lift the tailbone up, keep the navel in, shoulders down, chest forward, look up. Exhale, tuck the tailbone, draw the pubic bone toward the navel towards the spine, push into the floor, tuck your chin, look to the navel. Inhale, lift the tailbone, shoulders down, chest forward, look up. And keep going, find your own rhythm. Watch that you don't drop the belly, especially on the inhale. And also be mindful that the shoulders don't start to creep up. Think of the wave at sporting events in the stadium where the people stand up and cheer, and that goes all the way around the whole arena. See if you can initiate the movement at the tailbone and track it as it moves along the course of the spine, across the arena, all the way to the neck, to the crown of the head. And then again, initiate the movement at the base of the spine, so you get to really have a feeling of undulation and fluidity in the spine. And then bring yourself back to a neutral position with the spine. Bring the knees a bit wider apart and the toes a bit closer together for Mandukasana, child's pose. And sit your hips back towards your heels and extend your arms out. Personally, I prefer to have a block under my head in child's pose. If that serves you, then try it, and if you prefer to have your head on the ground, that's fine too. Keep the elbows up off the ground so you're building intensity at the beginning of the practice. Firm the tricep muscles to the bone and move the shoulder blades a little bit away from one another. And just restrain the enthusiasm of the shoulders so they are not crowding the neck and the ears. Walk your hands back maybe 1 inch closer to you and push into the sticky mat and really use that to press your hips back. Pull the power of the navel towards the sitting bones, toward the heels. So there is a really strong sensation of feeling grounded. Directing the weight toward the hips, toward the heels. Good, and then release and come back up to your hands and knees. And we'll do downward facing dog. Walk the knees back a tiny bit before you lift up so your stance isn't too closed or compressed. Again, hands pretty wide, at least shoulder width, and feet, knees at least hip width, maybe even erring on the erring on the side of width versus erring on the side of too narrow. As before, shoulders a little bit away from the ears and navel in a little. So rather than dropping the contents of your midsection toward the floor, just bring the lower frontal ribs and the belly in a little for some restraint. Move the hips back, knees up, and lift up. Lift the heels a little bit, bend the knees a lot. Pull the kneecaps toward the hips, pull the femurs into the hip sockets, draw the belly in. Broaden the shoulder blades away from one another. And then keep drawing the knees toward the hips even as you slowly re-extend the legs. And the heels may or may not come to the ground, that's fine either way, but keep really lifting the femurs toward you so there is a strong sense of engagement. And then releasing and bringing the knees down. And then have your blanket that you had on your knees and fold it in half maybe. So you just have a little bit of a height. And sit on your blanket, both legs out straight in front. Just a little bit of height is helpful for the hips, especially if you are someone who tends to experience slumping or heaviness at the base of the spine in Dandasana. And in fact, if you scoot yourself a little forward on your blanket so the sitting bones are just at the edge of the blanket, then you'll have helpful demonstration of downward dog. Then you'll have a little bit more assistance in getting the weight slightly forward onto the sitting bones. Now, bring your hands behind your right knee and bend the right knee. And then open the knee just a little bit. Open the foot a little bit, not way out wide, but just a tiny bit so that maybe the heel is just broader than your sitting bone itself. Bring your left hand back behind you and raise your right arm up. Push through the left arm, lift through the right arm, and then bend your right elbow to the inside of the right knee and twist open to the left. Lift your chest. And you're just gently working the right elbow against the right knee. You squeeze the knee in and push the elbow. So that's like a firm handshake between your elbow and your knee. And feel how this really, in particular, really helps to open the whole left front body and activates, sort of consolidates the right backside of your torso. Keep the shoulders descending. And then come back to the center. And switch sides. Extending the right leg out straight. And bringing the hands behind the left knee. Bring the left knee up and just a little bit wide. So we're just creating some width for the pelvis and the base of the spine. Right hand down, left arm up. Reach up. And then bring the left elbow to the inside of the left knee. Press them gently but palpably into one another and rotating to the right. And feel again how much open real estate this creates on the whole right chest, right front, right abdomen, and the consolidation that you experience in the left side of the back. Make sure that the shoulders, especially the left shoulder, are quietly descending. And then come back to the center. Use the hands behind your knee. Extend the left leg out. Bring your hands alongside you, a little bit back behind you, and push through the arms. Put a little bit of a bend in the elbows and point the elbows back behind you. It's a little reminiscent of like the chicken dance. Just slightly move the elbows back and apart. And lift the chest, lift the back ribs, lift the toes. Feet at least hip width apart. Good. And then bring your hands behind your right knee. Bend your right knee. And this time place the foot so it's more in front of the sitting bone or even a little closer to the thigh, a small distance from the inseam. Hold your shin with both hands, sit up nice and tall. Bring the right hand back behind you and the left arm up. Big breath in and exhaling, twisting to the right. Marichyasana 3, the second variation, and you can hold the knee with your wrist, with the crook of your elbow. Some of you might be happy to have the elbow on the outside of the knee. Do what your body prefers. Try to make body-driven decisions. Lift the chest, shoulders descend. And stay connected to the breath. Here you'll feel that this makes more space on this variation, makes a bit more space on the left side of the frontal trunk, and a bit more consolidation in the right side of the back. So just noticing how the different poses activate and release differently in the body so that we can call up that consolidation and that spaciousness later as needed. Good. Inhale and come back to the center. Extend the right leg out straight. Bend the left knee. Hold the left shin with both hands. And then bring your left hand behind your right arm up. Take a big breath in so you get a sense of length. And then rotating to the left. And you can hold again with your hand or your elbow or the elbow on the outside of the knee. Stay connected to the breath. That same feeling that we had in downward dog, gently draw the right kneecap toward the pelvis rather than feeling that the thigh is projecting toward the foot. Feel the thigh stabilizing in toward the pelvis. And then inhale and come back to the center and extend your left leg out straight. And then Upavishta Konasana, bringing the legs out wide apart. And your legs will decide for themselves. Hopefully you don't have a little dog in the way like I do. Not that he's in the way. Bring the legs out as wide as they'll go. And they really do decide for themselves how wide apart they want to be. So it's not entirely up to us. It's sort of a cooperation between us and the body. And again, if this is a challenging pose for you, sit up on that little folded blanket that you've got. It does help to have that little bit of height underneath the hips. So if you feel some of this kind of undertow of the navel being sucked back and the buttocks being scooped under, I'm exaggerating, hopefully it doesn't feel like this to you, but if you feel even the traces or the sort of artifacts of that sensation, well then, sit a little higher and scoot yourself more forward so you encourage the pelvis to be more neutral and not spill the back. It's less common, but it does happen that some people really splooge forward in this pose and they're really kind of, again, dumping the contents of the abdomen forward. And you can think of that same thing that we did in cat-cow and just gently bringing the pubic bone a little bit up and the whole navel plane slightly back. And these lower frontal ribs below the chest a little bit down. So it's sort of just dampen the enthusiasm. Like when you're talking to someone and they're just talking too loud and you become aware of it and you think, I wish that person were talking a little more quietly. These frontal ribs tend to do that in a lot of us, so they need lessons in modesty to just come slightly down and slightly back and be a bit more restrained. And sit tall in Upavishta Konasana. For some body types, this is much easier than Dandasana because the width of the legs takes some of the pressure off the hamstrings and also has a consolidating force at the base of the spine. So imagine here that you're drawing the energy from the outer edges of your feet towards the outer knees, towards the outer hips, towards the sacrum. The sacrum is like a black hole drawing energy toward it. It's magnetically attracting energy. And then letting the inseams extend toward the inner heels and extending through the toes so the toes are long, innervated, active, lifted. We want to feel in these seated poses and in Dandasana an ability to be really anchored, stabilized, and also buoyant. And in fact, we can't really have the one without the other. So we need to be able to push down to generate a reciprocal lift. And we need to be able to have that lift so that the downward isn't just pure undertow. If you notice that your feet tend to flop apart in this pose, and the toes are really heading back, then be extra mindful of bringing the inseam and the inner heel toward the floor. So the knees are pointing straight up like spotlights and the toes are pointing straight up like spotlights. And then Parshva Upavishta Konasana. A big full breath in. Feel the verticality of your trunk and your sternum, and exhale as you twist to the right. And in particular, feel the ribs on your left side of your body wrapping from the back toward the front, moving from the spine around toward the sternum. And feel the ribs on the right side of your body moving from the sternum around toward the back. Keep extending up through the toes. Keep retracting from the outer heel to the outer knee to the outer hip to the sacrum. Be mindful of those lower frontal ribs that they haven't, again, started talking too loudly. Bring them down and in. Inhale, come back to the center. And exhale, twisting to the left. Feel the ribs on the right side of your body wrapping from the back around the side toward the sternum. And the ribs on the left side wrapping from the sternum around the side toward the back. Shoulders down, toes up. The area below the navel and the sacrum are sort of magnetically drawn toward one another. So there is a stabilizing force there at the base of the spine. Bring the pit of the throat in. And inhale and come back to the center. And then you can have the hands behind you, on your thighs, in front of you. See what feels better and be mindful that you're able to stay upright. And anytime you start to feel that pulling under, bring your hands behind you. And if you start to feel that splooging or sort of collapsing forward, contain the contents of the front body. So we want a quiet tidiness, not overly controlled tidiness, but a mindful and gentle tidiness about the energy and the alignment in the body. Now from where you are in Upavishta Konasana, think of, don't do it, but think of twisting to the right. You can do it like 1-2%. You get a little bit more opening in the right side of the body and right side of the chest, and a little more consolidation in the left side of the back. And then just 1 or 2% twist to the left and feel an increased sense of openness in the left chest and an increased sense of consolidation in the right side of the back. And then come back to neutral and do both at once. Feel you're trying to twist in both directions. So hopefully what you feel is an increased sense of spaciousness in the chest, in the front body, and a stabilizing sense of consolidation in the back, all the way from the shoulders to the sacrum. Muscularized, but also energized. Toes up. Bring the pit of the throat slightly back into the body, and bring the whole weight of the head slightly back so that it's much more over, the weight of the head is positioned over the spine and not over the chest or sternum. And the navel plane and the sacral plane come toward one another for stability from below. And then release. And use the hands to bring the legs back together. Sit in Dandasana again with the feet quite wide. Hands wide, back behind you, a little bend in the elbows. Move the shoulders toward the elbows and the elbows behind you, and be on your fingertips, so it's kind of itsy bitsy spider hands. Push down through the hands, lift up through the chest. Think of it as the world's most narrow Upavishta Konasana. Pull from the outer ankles to the outer hips. Reach from the groins toward the inner heels, toes up. Sacrum and navel plane toward one another. Lower frontal ribs just slightly descend. Bring the whole head slightly back. Prick up your ears. And then release. Let the knees bend and come up to standing in Tadasana. And stand with the feet about hip width apart so they aren't right together. Have a little bit more space. Technically, and eventually someday when you're on a photo shoot for a yoga magazine or some lifestyle resort, you probably would have your feet together. But having the feet a little bit apart gives you a bit more stability and a little bit more space in the sacrum and the base of the spine. And since we're working towards Dandasana, just trying to repeatedly create more space here at the base of the spine. Arms long at your sides. Extend the toes. Draw the kneecaps toward the pelvis. Navel plane and sacral plane toward one another. Extend through the arms so the arms are active without being rigid. Pit of the throat back. And again, mindfully, delicately position the head slightly more back. So the head is over the spine, over the tailbone, and not over the chest. Deepen the breath. We'll do some half sun salutations, and we'll do 2 varieties. And the first time we'll really keep the knees bent. And some of you, if you have longer shins, or if you're really tall, or you have more stiffness in the hips, hamstrings, low back, you might like to have your hands on blocks. Otherwise, you can bring your hands to the floor. I'll demonstrate with blocks just so that people who need the blocks can see what that looks like. But don't feel the need to use blocks if you don't need them. So I have 2 blocks on either sides of my feet. And again, the feet are about hip width apart, not right together. Inhale, extend the arms up and reach up. And exhale, bend the knees, hips back, draw down and release the head. Let the back of the neck be long. And then inhale, keep the knees bent, keep the hips back. Inhale, straighten the arms, chest forward, shoulders back. Elongate the spine. And then exhale, release the spine, release the back of the neck. Inhale, chest forward, all the way up, legs straighten, rise up and reach. Exhale, hands at the heart. Inhale, extend the arms up, reach up. Exhale, dive forward, bending the knees, let the back of the neck lengthen down. Inhale, straighten the arms, shoulders back, belly in, long spine, long neck, long waist. And then exhale, draw down again. Inhale all the way up, rise up to standing, reach up. Exhale, hands at the heart. One more time. Inhale, extend the arms up. Exhale, dive forward, bend the knees, release the back of the neck. Inhale, arms straight, shoulders back, belly in, long waist, long neck. Exhale, draw down and in. Inhale all the way up, rise up and reach up. Exhale, release the hands. And then you can keep the blocks if you'd like, or block free. And this time, if you'd like to have the feet, start to walk the feet a little closer together, go ahead. And if it still feels more stable or more natural, organic for you to have the feet a bit apart, that's fine. And we'll do some half sun salutations. Inhale, extend the arms up, reach up. Exhale, dive forward, knees straight or bent as your body prefers. Inhale, extend the chest forward, shoulders back, long waist. Exhale, draw down and in. Inhale all the way up, reach the tailbone down and the chest up. Exhale, hands at the heart. Inhale, extend up. Exhale, dive forward, knees straight or bent. Inhale, extend the chest forward and shoulders back. Exhale, draw down and in. Inhale all the way up, reach up. Exhale. Keep going through the sequence and think back to the very beginning and that cat-cow undulation that we did with the spine, and you're looking for a similar quality here in the spine, really feeling, articulating, and connecting with fluidity in the spine and using the breath and the movement to work out the kinks. If there are places in your body where you particularly feel the stress of the day or the accumulated aches and pains of your activities, see if you can use the half sun salutations and the repetitive nature and the breath and just even the feeling quality of the sun salutations. See if you can ease the tension in your body, in your emotions. In particular, be mindful not to practice in a way that is building tensions, building emotional tensions, or building resistance or conflict with discomfort in the body. Finish the cycle that you're in now and go one more time through the whole sequence. And whenever you're done, be standing in Dandasana. Steady and stable in mountain pose. Extend through the toes. Draw the area below the navel back toward the sacrum and the sacrum toward the navel. And the half salutations, if you experience some resistance in Dandasana in the sacrum or the hips or the hamstrings, if there's just some kind of, if the issues with Dandasana or the sort of struggles or discomforts with Dandasana are just sort of accumulated muscular resistance from gardening or walking, some half-sun salutations can often do the trick to just build some movement, some circulation, a little warmth in the body and loosen things up. So if the resistance is fairly surface, you can often cleanse it a little bit fairly simply. That said, it took me probably 8 years to sit upright comfortably in Dandasana, so it might take more than a few sun salutations. Sometimes it really is a matter of building strength and just having faith and being consistent with the practice over time. So then we'll do Parshvottanasana without the arms, so we're really focusing more on the lower half today. So have your right foot forward and your left foot back. Hands on the hips. And you can see, as you step that back leg back, there tends to be a habit for a lot of us where the belly really splooge forward, the ribs to splooge forward. So the ribs below the navel, or below the chest, come toward the navel and a little bit in. And the pubic bone comes toward the navel and the navel comes a little bit in. So we're trying to actually increase little muscular stamina in the buttocks and hamstring and increase also some stretch in the front plane of the left leg. Hands on the hips, shoulders toward the elbows. Bend the right knee a little bit, extend the toes, and then pull the kneecap toward the hip so that leg is straight in a very active way. Draw the belly in, lift the chest. Take a big breath in and exhaling, extending just a bit of the way forward. Think of Dandasana, and you should hopefully feel that the right leg and the spine are in a Dandasana relationship. If we photoshopped out the left leg, spun ourselves around a little, we'd be in a Dandasana shape. Draw the belly in, lower frontal ribs toward the navel, toward the spine. Shoulders toward the elbows. And be very mindful with the placement of the head. Bring the pit of the throat in. You want to feel the beginning of cobra pose, some strength in the back. And then inhale, push through the feet, lift the chest forward and up. And turn to face over the left leg. Again, the ribs below the chest come toward the navel and in. The pubic bone comes toward the navel and the navel in, and straighten the back leg. Put a tiny little bend in the left knee, and then draw the left kneecap toward the pelvis. Big breath in, and then exhale and extend forward. And just going a modest distance. We're not going all the way into the whole shebang until you feel the left side, the left leg, and the trunk are in a Dandasana relationship to one another. Shoulders away from the ears, a little bit away from one another so that the shoulders don't start to pinch together behind the sternum. Keep the jaw relaxed. Keep gently, mindfully, persistently repositioning the head so the head's not dropping. Take those lower frontal ribs a little bit toward the navel and the navel in. Shoulder blades away from the ears. Kneecap, left kneecap toward the pelvis. Push the feet, inhale and come up and turn forward. Prepare for Prasarita Padottanasana, pretty wide stance with the legs. And both toes can be pointing straight ahead or a little bit in. And again, this is very much in relationship to Upavishta Konasana, which we did earlier in the class, the seated wide-legged pose, and now we're just doing it standing. Hands on the hips, put a little bend in the knees, and push through the balls of the feet and pull the kneecaps up so that action in the legs feels reliable and steady. Draw the belly in, lift the chest, and exhale, and hinging forward. And you can bring your hands to your shins, or your hands to a block, or your hands to the floor. We'll be, for today, only in the first expression of the pose, which is to say, going only so far forward that there is no rounding at all, and the spine is long. So you, depending on what's available in your body, you might be a little higher or a little lower, but feel a Dandasana relationship, roughly 90 degrees between the spine and the femurs. Move the shoulders away from the ears, arms are straight. Extend from the heels toward the toes, elongate your toes. Suck the kneecaps up. Draw the belly in. Take those lower frontal ribs slightly toward the navel and the navel in. Shoulders away from the ears. The feeling we're looking for is surprisingly understated. Hopefully it's very sustainable. If you want to be a bit more conservative with your back to come out of the pose, put a good bend in the knees and bring one hand at a time to your hips. If you're feeling more stable in your body today, you'll try to keep the legs straight and bring lightly with control both hands at once to the hips. Push yourself up. And then take a big step, and be in Tadasana. Standing in mountain pose. The momentum of the buttocks is toward the heels. Extend, elongate through the toes. The area below the navel and the sacrum come toward one another. Arms are active but not rigid. Gently shift the head back. Bring your hands, interlace your hands behind your head. Swing the elbows a little bit forward so you block your own peripheral vision. Shoulders down. And gently press your head, snug your head into your hands. Draw the navel back. The lower frontal ribs below your chest come a little bit toward the navel, a little bit back. And keep the head there and bring the arms back down again. Take stock of the feeling that you have from the hips up. It's so similar to the feeling that we want to have in Dandasana. Good, and then release. And then get 2 blocks in. In fact, if you're quite tall, I'll show you a variation depending on your height. We're going to do Uttanasana, standing forward bend, but again, not all the way down. So I think even I'll demonstrate with 1 block sideways and another block on top so I can be a little bit higher up. Even you could use the seat of a chair if you want to be even a little higher. What you're looking for is a place where you don't start to round the back. I have more propensity to round in the lower back. Some of you will have more propensity to arch in the upper back. But we're looking for a place where we can be quite contained. And if you think of it here, if I photoshopped myself, I'd be in Dandasana. So that's the alignment that we're looking for, is roughly a 90-degree angle. Feet can be hip width apart or closer together. And the closer the feet get together, it's a bit more challenging, so you can see how this pose feels for you. Put a little bend in the knees, elongate the toes forward, so the toes are active but not holding tension. And then push the feet, balls of the feet into the floor, and lift the kneecaps up to straighten the legs. Suck the kneecaps toward the hips, extend the toes toward the blocks, navel in, shoulders away from the ears. And the arms are straight. Put a little pressure into the arms. Draw the pit of the throat toward the spine, toward the neck. Take those lower frontal ribs. This is a delicate action. Don't need to overdo it, or it will create rounding in the back, which is just a touch. Take those lower frontal ribs toward the navel, navel in. Often this is a little bit more accessible to bodies than doing the same thing seated, so we can explore the energetics. If you find that you're really at the challenging edge of your limit, back it up a little. Raise the block, raise the hand so you can be well within your means. So you can explore it in a way that is not too challenging, that doesn't cause you to come into conflict or sort of wrestling with yourself. Shoulders away from the ears. Position the head slightly back. Lower frontal ribs a tiny bit toward the navel. Extend through the toes. Kneecaps toward the pelvis. Navel in. Keep the contents of the front body collected. Don't drop the front body. Good. And then bend the knees and push up. And then set your blocks aside. And we'll come down to sitting. We'll work on boat pose, everybody's favorite. It's actually like nobody's favorite, but here we are working on it anyway. So I changed my mind. Get a block and put the block between your shins. So it's just going to help keep the shins parallel, because a lot of times what happens in boat pose is the heels come together and the knees come apart, which is a good way of sort of avoiding some of the abdominal work. So we're just going to try to keep the knees on plane. I have it on wide, but I'm a pretty wide hipped individual. If you have more narrow hips than I do, you might feel better with the block on a more narrow setting. So see what feels good. I'm just going at a 3/4 angle so you can see you can sit on your mat any way you like. Boat pose is abdominal, but also works hip flexors and the quadriceps. So if you need to be a little bit delicate with your back, you might consider keeping the heels down for this whole sequence. Just work with what feels safe and challenging and not unwise. Hands behind the backs of the knees. Lift your chest up like it's school picture day, really feeling prim and proper. And see if you can keep the chest up. I always think of the whole clavicle like a pool noodle that cannot be submerged. So keep your pool noodle up. And then take those ribs below the chest toward the navel, and the pubic bone toward the navel, and the navel back towards the spine. So there might even be a little bit of rounding in the lumbar spine without the undertow sucking the pool noodle down. So we're trying to keep space and breath, aeration in the chest, and consolidation in the abdomen. So you might feel this is enough right here. Push the heels into the floor and dredge them back like a backhoe. Extend your toes. Next, if you want and if you can, lift the heels a little tiny bit. Pull the heels towards you, knees towards you. Front ribs toward the navel, pubic bone toward the navel, navel in. Keep your pull noodle up. Next, you can extend the arms out alongside you. Knees towards you, navel towards you, shoulders down. Next, you can lift the legs a little bit, shins parallel to the floor, knees towards you, navel towards you, shoulders down. Next, you can extend the legs straight. It's a very similar shape to Dandasana. Knees towards you, navel towards you, shoulders down. Keep gripping on your block. And then in reverse. Shins parallel to the floor, knees towards you, navel towards you. Heels almost to the floor, knees towards you, shoulders down. Hold the knees and then sit down. Good. And then release. Like I said, no one's a big fan of that pose, but it's a good pose to do. I won't make you do it twice, but if you want to, you could always pause the recording and do it again. And then we'll work on Urdhva Prasarita Padottanasana. So you are in the way, mister. I'm actually going to move my little fellow here. Okay, there you go. So you have a few choices here depending on what feels good in your back. And if you want to be a little bit, I think I'll go this way. If you want to be the most cautious with your back, is to lie on your back and place your arms alongside you, palms down, lift your hips up a little bit, and then sit on your thumbs. And what you want to get is that little scoop of the back. So push into the feet, lift the hips a little, move your buttocks towards your heels, and then set your hips back down. If you feel pretty strong, you can do arms out wide like a T. And if you're feeling extremely sassy and confident with your abdominal work, you can do arms overhead onto your dog. And what we're trying to avoid here is a lifting in the back where the belly splooges and the lumbar lifts. So whichever arm variation you've chosen, lift the hips a little bit, move the buttocks toward the heels, pubic bone toward the navel, lower frontal ribs toward the navel, and set yourself back down. So you want to feel, in this particular case, your low back is like a rubber stamp, and it's making a good clean stamp on the floor. And then extend both legs up. So here you are again, essentially in Dandasana, making a right angle with the body. Draw the kneecaps and the femurs toward the pelvis. Extend, elongate the toes. Lower frontal ribs toward the navel, navel toward the spine. And then take your right leg and lower it halfway toward the floor. And then bring it back up. It's okay if the legs aren't straight. If you can straighten them, straighten them. And if that's not available, do what you can do. Lower the left leg halfway down. Keep drawing the pubic bone toward the navel. Back up. Lower the right leg 2/3 of the way down. Really strongly draw the pubic bone toward the navel and the lower frontal ribs toward the navel. Come back up. Left leg 2/3 of the way down. If you have the arms overhead and or out in a T and it's feeling too challenging and your low back is lifting, bring the hands around under your hips, sit on your thumbs, leg back up. Now right leg all the way down until it touches the floor, and then 1 inch off, hover. Draw the pubic bone toward the navel, lower frontal ribs toward the navel, bring the right leg back up. Left leg all the way down, touch the floor, and then skim right above the surface. Straighten the legs as much as you can. Pubic bone toward the navel, southernmost tip of the sternum toward the navel. Raise the left leg back up. Bend your knees and release. Phew, good work. That's such a hard pose. If you really find that bugs your low back, don't go all the way down. You can do such modest actions there, even holding the leg straight up and building strength there. As long as it can feel safe in the body, it's a good way to build participation in this sort of sluggish part of the midsection from the ribs to the pelvis. So flip yourself over like a little pancake and come onto your forearms. You can watch for a sec. We'll do Makarasana, which is it's a couple different poses called Makarasana, but this is the more benign of them, believe it or not. A great way to build some awareness of the placement of the head and some integration in the back, which will serve us well when we come back to Dandasana in a moment. So come down, you'll come down onto your forehead, and you'll have your hands and your legs behind your head. And the legs can be right together or a little bit apart. You can actually let your body decide. Toes will point back, and you push the tops of the feet in the floor, firm the knees. Tailbone and buttocks toward the heels, pubic bone toward the navel. Shoulders away from the ears. And then inhale, lift the chest, lift the head, reach the chest forward. Lift the legs, reach the thighs back, lift the legs up. So all the weight is in the pelvis, some in the abdomen. Keep reaching the chest forward, 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 shoulders down. Legs back, back, back. Pull the hamstrings toward the sitting bones, pull the shoulder blades towards the pelvis, pull the chest forward, send the thighs toward the toes. Good. Release down. Rest for a moment. You can turn your head to one side, or you can make a little hand stack and place your forehead on your hands. We'll do it one more time. It's not a very flashy pose, so don't worry if you don't come up all that high. Okay, here we go. Again. Hands behind your head, point your toes. Push the toenail side of the toes and the tops of the feet, like you have flippers on, into the sticky mat, knees up. Tailbone and buttocks toward the heels, pubic bone toward the navel. Full breath in. And then exhale, lift the elbows, lift the head, lift the chest, go forward. Don't think more forward than up. Shoulders away from the ears. And then lift the legs. Extend the quadriceps toward the toes. Pull the hamstrings toward the buttocks. Lift up. Try to breathe in a way that is not desperate or flustered. Shoulder blades and hamstrings towards the sacrum. Sacrum gathering energy. Chest forward, quadriceps back. Good, and then release down. And if you turn your head the opposite direction this time. And rest. Good. And then roll to your side and come up to sitting. Hello, little helper. And let's see. I was going to say to use the blanket, but we're not going to use the blanket. So sit in a Dandasana, or kind of like a day at the beach Dandasana, so you're leaning back a little bit. And you can have your hands pointing back, hands to the side, hands forward, whichever you prefer. And think of the work we just did with the belly. So draw those lower frontal ribs and the base of the sternum a little bit toward the navel, pubic bone a little bit toward the navel, so the belly feels consolidated. And then also think of having hands behind the head and lift the chest. So what we're hoping to find is a cooperative strength in the front body and strength in the back body. Neither one overpowering the other, because we're looking for elongation in the spine. The shape of Dandasana is not a back bend and is not a forward bend, but it's an active stabilization. Now take your left leg and push the heel into the floor and draw your right kneecap towards your femur and lift the right leg a little bit. Keep your toes long and feel it's almost like when you put a radio antenna back down. I guess that's an old-fashioned reference now, but draw the femurs of both legs toward the hip sockets, toes long, and watch if the tendency is to slump, drop the head. Now you can learn a little bit about your habits. Bring the right leg down. It's so hard. This is such a bizarrely challenging. Lots in the quad, lots in the hip flexor, but we do need strength there. and see where you buckle. If it's the low back, if it's the belly, if the head jerks forward or goes back. Those things are certainly happening in Dandasana, even if it's slightly less accentuated. So we're adding stress to the system here to find out what we should work on and be mindful about. If it's really hard, walk further back. Lower frontal ribs toward the navel, navel in. Pull noodle up. And then push the right heel into the floor and lift the left leg. And both femurs into the hip sockets. Really draw the thighs in. Navel in. Your leg might just barely be off the floor, visible to the naked eye. That's fine, but you feel it and you know you're working on lifting the leg. It's not a matter of higher is better. Feel how much you're working that left quadricep. Keep the belly in, chest up, use the arms, that's where we're leaning back. Good, and then release. Blah, and then be a little blob. It's hard, it's a lot of work in the quads. Now let's put it together and try Dandasana. You can wiggle your legs a little if you need a little wiggle of fun. Take your blanket, fold it in half, and sit up on it. Dandasana is a pose where the arm position varies so much on anatomical length, how long your arm is in relationship to your torso. When we look in Light on Yoga, the classic as depicted by Mr. Anger is the arm straight, almost like sort of parallel to the spine, right alongside the hips. But for some people, the arms are so long that when they do that, the shoulders are up and they need to bend the elbows or have the hands lower than the hips. And other people, the arms are so short, they can't reach and they're kind of really reaching. So instead of thinking about the outward appearance of the pose, think of alignment as an energetic experience or as the feeling quality. What we're trying to align with is the feeling of the pose and not the kind of dogma or rules and regulations around the pose. So as you get set up in the pose, you might find classically, so to speak, the feet are together. But again, if you feel compression in the base of the spine, especially for women and if you're menstruating, have the feet a bit wider. It can help quite a bit. Start with the hands wide, wider than your hips and back behind you. And no matter what, put a little bend. If you have super shorty arms, put your hands up on blocks. That's fine. Short-armed people are great too. Either variation, put a bend in the elbows and move your elbows back and move your shoulders toward your elbows. And now move the lower ribs toward the navel and the navel back. Think of the ribs and the elbows are like on the same soccer team going towards one end of the field. Pull your kneecaps so the kneecaps are on that same soccer team. And now bring the sacrum forward, chest up, sort of opposing soccer team. Toes up, elongate your toes. Bring the pit of the throat back and position the head so the weight of the head, you can feel it arrive and be supported over the back body. And if it serves you to keep your hands here, back behind you, wider, up on blocks, be here, work with the pose. Or you can bring the hands down alongside your hips and it's strong. The arms are not passive in Dandasana, they're a contributing element. Push through the arms. Feel the abdominal work we did and draw the kneecaps toward the navel and then navel towards the spine. Those lower frontal ribs just have to be a little quieter in most cases and come back. Feel the back bend. Imagine you have your hands behind your head and slightly push your head back. Lift and really clear some space. Create a clearing around the collarbone. Remember the quadricep work of lifting one leg at a time and find your quads. This is quad time here. Find those muscles and engage. And actually the strength we can create in the quadriceps here very much helps to free the back. When the quads are willing to do some of the work, it's quite helpful. You can experiment here with squeezing the legs toward one another, which tends to draw energy toward the midline, up through, emphasizes the spine. And then you can experiment with pressing the legs away, use the friction of the mat, press the legs apart, which emphasizes the collarbone. The lateral quality of the hips gets you more width, breadth. Keep the jaw relaxed, and we will be here for a few more breaths. So investigate sustainability, how to be with the actions of the pose, to stay involved with the conversation of the pose and not drift off to other internal conversations. Keep the jaw relaxed. Elongate through the toes. There are certain poses that have a gravitas about them. And this is one of those poses. It's not an exuberant shape. It's not the body language of an extrovert. It's not a particularly internal shape. And it's not the body language of an introvert. It's very stable, very contained, has equanimity. Dandasana is teaching the body to work together without extremes. And you'll find the desire for extremes come in, the desire to collapse at the base of the spine, or shift the head far forward or far back. The traits that tend to be dominant want to assert their dominance. That is not the lesson of Dandasana. The Danda of Dandasana was a staff, like a walking stick or a scepter, that implied authority, moral authority, and rule, in the same way that a king in Western iconography would hold a scepter. We see imagery of yogis holding a danda, very steady, reliable, strong. The staff isn't bent or willowy. It's not a sapling. So here we are building these same qualities in our own character, in our own nervous system. Stay connected to the breath. And then release. And come down onto your back. You might like to use your blanket now as a support behind the back of your head. And come down onto your back, bend your knees, push the feet into the floor, lift the hips a tiny little bit and move the buttocks toward the heels and the pubic bone toward the navel, and set your back down. Dandasana can be a surprising amount of work in the back and in the back body. So just to let the back be in contact with the floor can be quite calming after Dandasana. Take those lower frontal ribs and move them just slightly toward the navel. And bring your hands and rest your hands on your chest or your abdomen. And then lift the right knee and hold either behind the knee or the shin, as you please. And extend the left leg out straight on the floor. And then switch sides. Bring the right foot down. Draw the left knee in, either holding behind the knee or the shin. Extend the right leg out. And then switch sides again. Draw the right knee in. Extend the left leg out. And this time hold the right knee with the left hand. Extend the right arm out. And then draw the right knee across to the left as you rotate the chest from left to right. Supta Marichyasana. We're not in a particularly ambitious phase of the class at this point. We're sort of relieving some of the tension and effort. Come back to the center. Bend both knees. Often when we twist, the spine gets a bit akimbo, so push into the feet, lift the hips, buttocks toward the heels, and locate your pelvis in a way that's neutral on the mat. Extend the left knee in and the right leg out. Hold the left knee with the right hand, left arm out wide like a T, and draw the left leg over and across as you turn the chest from right to left. Watch that the back leg doesn't get forgotten, because I see it over and over again that bottom straight leg gets dull and kind of lifeless. So rather really reach, like the right leg is still a very clear vector here, helping to remove tension from the back, still acting as sort of a traction device to get length into the back. Come back to the center. Bend both knees, push into the feet, lift the hips, buttocks toward the heels, and place the hips down in a way that is neutral. And then draw both knees in and roll yourself up like a little hedgehog. And if it feels appealing, you can even bring the forehead towards your knees. Sometimes it feels nice to rock back and forth a little, like an armadillo. And then release. And bring yourself into Shavasana. Extend the legs out. Shoulder blades away from the ears. All the way from the arms, from the shoulders. Turn the arms so the palms are facing up. If there's tension in the arms or alignment such that the hands are lifting up, either place some blocks under the back of your hands or bend the elbows again so the hands can rest on the chest or abdomen. Let the feet flop apart away from one another. Let the tongue come down away from the roof of the mouth. Let the face release all expression. Jaw relax. And be in Shavasana. If you'd like to, I invite you to stay in Shavasana. Otherwise, let your next breath be a little deeper. One at a time, bend your hands, your elbows to rest your hands on your chest or your abdomen. Bend your knees and roll to your right side. Let your head be supported by your blanket or by your right arm. And roll more to face the floor. And use your arms to press yourself up and come up to sitting. Sit in a manner that's comfortable for your body. And we'll close with one round of Om. Om Shanti. Thank you. Thank you for practicing with me today. And I hope the dogs provided some entertainment and didn't block the camera too much. Thanks for being here. Be well. Enjoy your practice.